Good evening to one and all. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to this GFYP webinar October 2023 session. It is a glorious moment to extend my warm wishes to all of you on behalf of the Global Forum for Young Philosophers. Today, we are truly fortunate to have Dr. Prasanth Shukla as our key speaker. He is an associate professor, Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow, and visiting faculty, Dept Pilani, and he has illustrious academic career along with a long list of achievements as a professor in India. His major areas of interest are Western philosophy, contemporary philosophy, postmodern philosophy, philosophy of religion, symbolic logic, etc. Well, sir, with great honor to be graced by the presence of such an academician, I cordially welcome you to this program. It is such an honor, sir, to have you for deliver a paper on discourse ethics and Jagan HABERMAS. It is a moment of extreme pleasure to welcome Ms. Binita Joseph, Assistant Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Maharajas College, Ernakulam. She introducing the speaker and the theme. With extreme love, we wholeheartedly welcome you, Binita, ma'am. And
Thank
at
you.
this present moment, I take this opportunity to welcome our lovely ma'am, the great mind behind this webinar, director and the patron of GFYP, Professor Srikala M. Nair. I warmly welcome dear ma'am to this program. And I welcome all the professors, academicians, research scholars, students, and all other esteemed participants to this program. Once again, welcome all. Now I invite Ms. Binita Joseph, Assistant Professor, Department of Philosophy, Maharajas College, Ernakulam, to introduce the speaker and the theme. Over to you, Binita ma'am.
Once again, thank you, Likita. A very good afternoon to all. Today we have Dr. Prasanth Shukla is with us. Now he is working as an associate professor of philosophy at University of Lucknow. He is the official visiting faculty of BITS Pilani and Bhatkande Music Institute. He has worked at St. Stephen's College and Hindu College of Delhi University. His area of interest include classical Greek philosophy, postmodernism, and symbolic logic. He did his doctoral research from Center for Philosophy, JNU, in 2006, and postdoctoral research from Kapodistrian University of Athens, Greece, in 2008. He has been the recipient of UGC JRF and MHRD Greek Government Scholarship. He has authored and co-authored 8 textbooks by Director of Higher Education and prescribed by Tripura University. He is associated with Indo-Hellenistic Society for Culture and Development, Athens, Greece, a Center of Advanced Research in Phenomenology, USA, and American Association of Philosophy Practitioners. And today he is discussing on the topic discourse ethics and Jürgen Habermas. As we all know, Habermas is a German philosopher and social theorist in the tradition of critical theory and pragmatism. His work addresses communicative rationality and the public sphere. His work focuses on the foundations of epistemology and social theory, the analysis of advanced capitalism and democracy, the role of law in the critical social evolutionary context, although within the confines of the natural law tradition and contemporary politics. Habermas's theoretical system is devoted to revealing the possibility of reason, emancipation, and rational critical communication latent in the modern institutions and in the human capacity to deliberate and pursue rational interest. Habermas's discourse ethics is an attempt to explain the implications of communicative rationality in the sphere of moral insight and normative validity. Democracy, in the Habermasian sense, has communicative rationality as its decisive component. Indeed, Habermas' plea for an ethics founded on communicative rationality can be envisaged as a proposition for a set of principles oriented towards deliberate democracy. The pragmatic primacy endorsed to the construction of a discursively configured reality is motivated by the conviction that the linguistic beings are able to raise rationally justifiable validity claims. We can mobilize the empowering resource of communicative rationality to determine both the constitution and the evolution of the society. In order to make a sense of discursive nature of democracy, we need to reflect upon five interested, interrelated dimensions of communicative rationality, namely reason, communication, understanding, intelligibility, and negotiable consensus. His discursive ethics demonstrate that we as a communicative species are capable of mutual understanding and that we as a discursive species are capable of reaching agreements. This is the point at which democracy come into play. Democracy rests upon the empowering potential of communicative rationality because the symbolically mediated and intelligibly structured coordination of our actions within the sphere of reality lies at the heart of every discursively organized society. Now, I welcome Dr. Prasanth Shukla to deliver his speech. Over to the speaker.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful introduction. I hope I would be able to justify what kind words you have given to me. Before starting, I would like to thank the coordinators, particularly Professor Nair, ma'am, for providing me such an esteemed platform and in front of such learned audience. It's really a privilege, and I'm feeling honored because of this. Now, before starting, I would like to give some sort of justification why I have chosen this particular topic and why I want to look at the topic of discourse ethics through the lens of Jürgen Habermas. So, the first thing first, why I'm taking Habermas, the reason being, I completed my PhD while making a comparative study of dialogue and communicative action. In the process, I started with the method of dialogue as was introduced by Socrates, better to call Plato's Socrates. I moved further in the journey of my research while talking about the transcendental dialectic of Immanuel Kant. And later on, going through Hegel and Marx, I finally came to Jürgen Habermas. And as I look into the issue, I find that the proper way to understand, to comprehend, to read Habermas is through these preceding thinkers. So once I talk about Habermas, actually I'm looking at Habermas, looking through the eyes of maybe Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, and Marx. Some questions or some allegations are time and again posed against Habermas. Some of them say that he is being too utopian in nature. There are some people who say that his theory sounds good in theoretical aspect, but is not practical at all. In fact, there was a time when one of my colleagues posed a pinching question to me. He said, you keep on talking about the communicative rationality. You keep on talking about developing negotiable consensus. What would you say if some person is keeping you on the gunpoint? Would you like to talk about communicative rationality? Would you like to differentiate between public sphere and the private sphere? Or would you just react as a layman would do? Well, my response was Habermas, as a philosopher, as a thinker, is always creating some theory in an ideal background. We are not sure whether it will be practicable in the actual situation or not. But at least this much we have to admit, that while the philosophers are giving us theory, actually they are giving us a general formula. Maybe they are creating some parameters, they are providing us some litmus paper test, going through which we can identify where we are standing and how much progress we are supposed to make. So, when I talk about any of the philosophers, maybe the classical, the medieval age, or the modern philosophers, I see a philosopher talking about an idea or a theory. This theory might be practicable, might be not, but that is not the concern. The concern is that is such a theory providing us some such general formula which provokes us, which motivates us, or maybe which inspires us to move ahead in the true spirit of modernity, reason, science, and progress. So when I talk about any of the theories given by a philosopher, I try to compare it with, let's say, a perfect cup of tea. Well, none of us can claim that he or she has actually ever tasted a perfect cup of tea. Then why are we talking about this? We are actually conceptualizing a perfect cup of tea so that we can be aware what is the status of the actual cup of tea which we are holding in our hands. While conceiving the idea of a perfect cup of tea, we understand where we are actually standing and how much progress we are supposed to make so that we can go closer and closer to the so called ideal situation. So maybe the theory of a philosopher is just like, let's say, the ideal gas equation of a scientist. As we all know, the ideal gas equation does not exist, but it helps us to calculate, to comprehend the actual nature or the actual state of affairs. Similarly, in the field of ethics, once we present some theory, what we are actually doing is that we are giving a standard and we move forward with the help of that standard, and then we realize how much we are progressing or maybe retrogressing. Now, if this is the situation, there may be people who would say that these are the philosophers who are maybe just like the people sitting in a dark room and searching for a black cat. I mean, this is a particular allegation you all must be aware, which is posed against the analytical philosophers. And here come the continental philosophers and the postmodern who try to merge different disciplines together so that they can develop an all inclusive, holistic knowledge. Well, I am neither in favor of one particular stream of philosophy or not going against that. It was like a privilege for me because in my PhD days, I was trained to work in continental philosophy and postmodernism. I was privileged to have the guidance of people like Professor R.P. Singh, Professor M. Srinivas, and Professor Penny Selvam Sir, who are known authorities in the field of phenomenology, existentialism, and postmodernism. But later on, when I joined University of Lucknow, I came in contact with the people like Professor Rajendra Prasad, Professor Rakesh Chandra, who were experts and trained in analytical philosophy. And to my utter shock, I realized that I was understanding only one aspect of the discussion. So being in touch with the stalwarts of both the different, rather opposite dimensions, I had the privilege of understanding the issues from two different perspectives. I believe it has helped me immensely to develop an all inclusive approach. So that was quite interesting. And I remember when I had a word with Professor Shrikala Nair ma'am around a week back. And ma'am made a very interesting remark. Ma'am, I hope you remember. You said, I expect you talk about continental philosophy because at least this much I am certain that you are not an analytic student of analytical philosophy. I hope you remember, ma'am. And I was numb.
Yeah, yeah.
I was I was confused, ma'am, because I was not sure how to respond to this remark. The reason being, I have seen and I have been in touch with the people who claim to be continental philosophy, and I tried to learn as much as my competency was in the continental field. But then later on, when I came to the analytical field, I found it equally interesting. So let us presume that we are not bifurcating philosophy into analytical and continental. We are just doing philosophy per se. In fact, that is what is demanded by the philosophers in the present day scenario. A layman does not look at the philosopher as an analytical or the continental follower. They look as a philosopher as philosopher being qua philosopher. So I would try to merge both the understanding, and I hope, as per my competency allows, I would be able to do justice to the topic selected. So the first thing which comes to our mind is, why discourse ethics? As we see the present cultural political scenario, it is the utmost need of the present day society. As we see US Iraq war, or maybe you can call it US Iraq assault, maybe we saw the Russia Ukraine controversy, or right now we are looking at Israel and Palestine issue right now going on. We feel that the people are being too scientific, too factual, and maybe too teleological. What is missing right now is a proper kind of ethical comprehensibility of the issue. And once we say ethics, we are differentiating between ethics and morality. In fact, there is a reason why Jurgen Habermas, in his work Between Facts and Norms, does not use the word discourse morality, but uses the term discourse ethics. Because, like many other thinkers, including Immanuel Kant, Habermas is of the opinion that, of course, we should do ethics first and morality later. In other words, we should do a theoretical understanding first and then try to apply it in the society in the form of morality. So when I try to ponder over the question, what do I mean by good? Good within a single inverted comma, I am actually trying to generate a definition of the term good. That would give rise to a standard definition, maybe. That would give rise to a kind of theory. But once the theory has been constructed, later on we try to put it in practice, and then we don't ask the question, what is good? Rather, we give a moral principle which says, quote unquote, be good. It is not necessarily that a person who has studied ethics properly would be a moral person in practical life, but it is highly probable. Actually, it is also not certain that a person who is actually good in practice has understood, has read the technical, philosophical, ethical theories. But yes, at least this much we can say that if we comprehend the theories of ethics, there is high possibility that we would keep put it in practice sooner or later. So there is no claim that a theoretical understanding of ethics would make you a good person. But yes, there is fair enough possibility that if you have comprehended the ethical theories, you might become a good person. And the same process applies in almost all the branches of philosophy. The proper study of logic would not guarantee that you would argue properly. But yes, the study of logic would at least increase the possibility of giving a better argument. So on in the field of philosophy of law or the philosophy of society or whatever the field you say. So, my intention here is to emphasize that a philosopher is trying to generate a theory, and it is the task of a person to apply it in the field. That is why philosophy and sociology go hand in hand, go side by side. Whatever a philosopher conceptualizes or theorizes, a sociologist tries to put it in a specific context. In a way, a sociologist tries to justify or validate the hypothetical, the ideal theory which has been presented by a philosopher. Jurgen Habermas is one of the people who are equally good in the field of philosophy as well as in the field of sociology. In fact, while working in Max Planck's Institute, he never claimed that he is a philosopher. He merely said that I am a thinker, where the term thinker, quote unquote, includes all, whether a philosopher, a logician, an anthropologist, a sociologist, or maybe a political thinker. Anyways, once we talk about the discourse ethics of Habermas, we have to look at Habermas through the eyes of Immanuel Kant. And he himself admits that his entire theory is a reaction or maybe an extension of Kantian deontological ethics, particularly the Kantian categorical imperatives. Why so? The answer to this question is tried to be resolved in the present day discussion. So I hope we have enough platform to start today's discussion. So kindly allow me to share my PPT here. I hope it is visible. Shall I
Yes, sir.
start? Okay, thank you. So, the first question which comes to our mind is when we talk about discourse ethics, or maybe when Habermas talks about discourse ethics, why he time and again comes back to the democratic setup. It is because Habermas was a stern believer that any ethical discussion is possible only and only in a democratic background. In any other format of government, you cannot claim to be ethical. Why so? Because in order to be ethical, as J.J. Mackenzie says, there should be availability of options in front of you. Number one, there should be freedom of choice so that you can freely choose between the options available. Number two, and whatever you are doing must make some impact over other members of the society. If these conditions are not fulfilled, you cannot claim to make an ethical discussion. As you can see, such a standard environment for ethics seems possible only and only in a democratic setup. And that is why, in his prominent work, Theory of Communicative Action, Habermas starts with the discussion of democracy and then comes to the concept of discourse ethics. As Chinua Achebe, the famous Nigerian novelist, has said, a functioning, robust democracy requires a healthy, educated, participatory followership and an educated, morally grounded leadership. In fact, one of the most fundamental features of democracy is that it allows human beings to engage in a process of thoughtful discussion and a constructive dialogue. Hereby it is termed as deliberation. In fact, I remember one of the famous quotes as given by Joseph Zubert when it is said, the aim of any communication should not be victory over other, rather to develop a consensus. We cannot dialogue with others with the strategy to win over the argument. That would not serve the purpose. The exact purpose of any dialogue should be so that both the parties can understand each other. Maybe that is the reason that in the present day society, we do not accept monologues, we do not accept even dialogues. We are living in the world of multilogues, sometimes also called as polylogues. Remember, once you give a post on maybe Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, there are so many people who would be eager to respond to whatever you are saying. And remember, all these people would be coming from different backgrounds, different contexts, different upbringing, and different understanding. And it is through the mutual clash of different opinions that a consensus can develop. And that is the reality of the present day society in which discourse ethics seems to be more appropriate than other models. While Kant talks about his ethics in Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals, or maybe the Critique of the Practical Judgment, we all know how much emphasis he gives on his categorical imperatives. As we all know, the categorical imperatives, no matter how appealing they seem, they snatch away our opportunity to deliberate, to interrogate, or to criticize the imperatives. In fact, the name itself tells the story. These are imperatives, and not only imperatives, these are categorical. These are the minimal suppositions which you are supposed to accept, imbibe, and practice if you want to carry on any discussion in the field of ethics. Whether you talk about the first categorical imperative, where Kant says, always act on such a principle which has the potentiality to become a universal law, or the second categorical imperative, whether he says that all the people should be treated as end and not as means, or the third imperative, where he talks about the kingdom of ends. If you notice, these are absolutely appealing imperatives, but then they do not provide you a platform or a space enough for discussion, deliberation, or questioning. This is the only problem which Habermas finds with the Kantian ethics. And that is why he emphasizes so much on the term deliberation. There should be enough space to carry on the process. No dictum should be a closed-ended dictum. In fact, there should be a possibility of open-ended dialogue where the point at which I stop, maybe you can carry on further. And I would be having absolutely no claim that my understanding is the absolute understanding. In a way, Habermas emphasizes that I may have an understanding, but I cannot claim to have the understanding. So, to deliberate here means to reflect, to ponder, and to contemplate. More specifically, to deliberate with other obliges us to navigate our way through situations of purposeful interaction that requires context sensitive ethical framework of communication. Well, since ancient times, I mean, since the time of Thales and Anaximander, thinkers have pondered over the definition, the nature, the possibility, the methodology, and the limitations of a democratic framework, coming from the term demos. Though the way Jürgen Habermas explicates them places him in the front line, because it was he who was actually talking about uh, discourse ethics in a participatory democratic framework. I'm not claiming that he was the first person. Actually, the seeds of his dialogue can already be seen in the works of Aristotle once Aristotle introduces us to the term democratic participation. But this term has been given its fullest throttle in the works of Jürgen Habermas, which we enjoy nowadays. As we all know, and as Dr. Joseph has already said, Jürgen Habermas is a German philosopher, 1929 born, and a social theorist of the tradition of critical theory as well as pragmatism. His works talk about communicative rationality, where he distinguishes between the public sphere, the private sphere, and the intimate sphere. There are people who claim that Habermas is the second generation of the critical theorist, the first generation being Horkheimer and Adorno. But it is quite interesting that Habermas is never pleased by this kind of adjective added to his name, because he does not seem to be very much affiliated or attached to his predecessors of the first generation. What he is giving is novel, is fresh, and is appealing in almost a different kind of sense. Every democratic setup in the Habermasian sense must have discourse ethics as its decisive component. And once we say discourse ethics, actually we are treating it as against maybe teleological ethics, that is the consequential ethics, or the deontological ethics. In fact, Habermas would not agree even with the virtue ethics as given in Ethica Nicomacheia. So he says democratic decision-making process can never be based solely on the self-referential motivations of isolated individual. As he says this, he holds a flag against any possibility of dictatorial regime, maybe monarchy, even oligarchy. Rather, he says they are founded on the mutually dependent wills of the interconnected actors. I am what I am because of my teachers and my senior colleagues. I cannot claim that I have a self-referential motivation. Whatever motivation I have has got enough impact and influence by from the people with whom I have been interconnected. One of the main objectives of the deliberative form of democracy is to give a rationally grounded voice to the members of a particular community. Why a particular community? Because it is context sensitive in nature. So these members, whose capacity to develop a sense of solidarity constitutes a precondition for guaranteeing the relative stability of symbolically mediated and relationally constructed realities. Democratic model of social organization cannot dispense with rationally determined process of collective deliberation. Only insofar as we deliberate collectively over the purposive organization and normative habitualization of society can we ensure that the course of history is guided by the sense of a shared responsibility. This is what Dr. Joseph, I hope, meant when she used the term negotiable consensus, where I negotiate with all the other members but with a sense of shared responsibility. It is in this sense that the linguistic turn in the social sciences, which is motivated by the rejection of atomistic presuppositions, and once he says atomistic presuppositions, actually he is hinting of Bertrand Russell's first phase. You all remember the theory of definite description and the theory of logical atomism. Underlying traditional philosophies of consciousness and the defense of intersubjectivist assumption underpinning post-metaphysical sociologies of language. It is homological to the deliberately turn in social reality, which is characterized by a shift from an arbitrarily ruled collective entity to a discursively constituted order. In fact, this is precisely the linguistic turn which Habermas refers to time and again. Any democratic institution enjoys a considerable degree of legitimacy in terms of their capacity to regulate ideological, that is ethics, and behavioral, that is moral referential point shared by all members of a given community. If following Habermas, a discursive or deliberative model replaces the contract model, and if, as a result, the legal community constitutes itself not by any way of social contract, as talked about by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, rather on the basis of a discursively achieved agreement, then the normative cornerstone of a democratically organized society is not simply its formal commitment to producing and protecting judicially confined social relations, rather, its substantive capacity to enhance its members' active participation in collective process of consensus-oriented deliberation. So the purpose is not victory, but generating a consensus among the participants. The whole point of democracy is to do justice to the fact that human existence is a condition of discursive reciprocity, where it means no person would be allowed to be passive in a participation. There should be action, reaction, counter reaction, and the process will keep on going up to the time a consensus has been achieved. So, in order to provide society with the solidity of a collectively sustained, communicatively structured, and rationally justified background of normativity for the daily construction of reality. So he denies that there is any transcendental form of reality against and beyond this world. If there is any reality, it is located in the social, cultural, political contours. So this overall stability of the society is contingent upon its capacity to incorporate and to respond to the demands of its members intersubjectively negotiated search for some form of validity. Democracy, then, is inconceivable without reciprocity, the same as we learned in the field of ethics. Ethics does not make any sense unless and until it makes some impact over other members of the society. So if I'm sitting inside my room and I'm listening to music, let's say, I would neither be moral nor be immoral. Rather, I would be amoral up to the time I'm not influencing others. I would be claimed to be kept in the category of moral or immoral only and only when I raise the volume of my music system to this much pitch that it starts disturbing my neighbors. That is why he says democracy needs reciprocity because of the interdependence of the individual freedom and collective freedom. In fact, he says the individual liberties of the subject of private law and the public autonomy of enfranchised citizens reciprocally make each other possible. Just as the discursively motivated reciprocity between subjects is crucial to the functioning of democratic process, the confluence of autonomy and solidarity is central to the success bonding process, generating empowering dynamics of social integration. One more significant feature of such a democratic setup is that it is able to foster social relations based on mutual understanding, mutual agreement. It allows for the emergence of both individual as well as collective form of self-determination. So Habermas says there are four conditions for subjects' free association with a democratic setup: consolidation of an effective political apparatus, more or less clearly defined self. And he does not mean a transcendental self, rather, a politically, culturally located self. The construction of a citizenry and the creation of economic and social milieu. With this, he comes to his discourse ethics. According to Habermas, the right to both individual and collective self-determination obtains not only force, but also legitimacy through his discourse ethics. For developing such an ethics, the most crucial ingredient would be a communicative rationality, which means the reason is not coming from a philosopher who is standing on an ivory tower. It is coming when the philosopher comes down in the streets, discusses with other, listens to, and speaks, and thus, as the consequence of this discussion, develops his or her rationality, just like the French coffee house culture. Indeed, Habermas's plea for an ethics founded on communicative rationality can be envisaged as a proposition for a set of principles oriented towards deliberative democracy. So there is no principle of ethics which is beyond question, not even categorical imperatives. So that makes him different from his previous predecessors. So he says, in order to make sense of the discursive nature of democracy, we need to reflect upon five interrelated dimensions of his discourse ethics. And these are reason, that reason which has been developed out of discussion; communication, where the communication is intended for refining our understanding, what we call in India as the Parishkar Vidya. We all know Samvad or Shastrarth would not be possible unless and until we realize that this Samvad is practiced only to refine our understanding, the Parishkar of Gyan. Understanding, the Samatva Bhav; intelligibility, the Pragya; and finally, the negotiable consensus. His discourse ethics demonstrates that we are capable of mutual understanding, that we, as discursive species, are capable of reaching agreement. And this is the sign of a citizen. We try not to win, we try to understand other and thereby agree. This is the point at which democracy comes into play. Democracy rests upon the empowering potential of discourse ethics because the symbolically mediated and intelligibly structured coordination of our action within the sphere of reality lies at the heart of every discursively organized society. So the conditions for discursive democracy are, I will be quick, democracy is not possible without Verstand, which means the ultimate resource for justification is not faith, but reason. Number two, democracy is unthinkable without Verständigung, which means not monologue, not even dialogue, but a multilogue. Number three, democracy is impossible without Verstehen, which means in democratic society, the ultimate resource of signification is not the acceptance of facticity, but the struggle over normativity. Democracy is not possible without mutual intelligibility. The egotistic self-referentiality won't work anymore in the present day society. And finally, democracy is unimaginable in a democratic society without a search for agreement. And here, there should also be a possibility of agreement to disagree. So even if I'm not agreeing with you, I can say, let us agree to disagree. This leads to a kind of collective will formation. So the will is not holy. The will is not general. The will is not coming from ivory tower. It is developing as a result of our discourse ethics and communicative rationality. And these are the two mutually inclusive conditions for developing an understanding of interdependent subjects, better to call it intersubjectivity. From a Habermasian point of view, the construction of an emancipatory society is inconceivable without a sustained attempt to bring about a solid, the robust form of democracy based on deliberative power that is embedded in people's communicative capacity. So, with this, I would like to come to the concluding section, and this concluding section endeavors to address a number of issues where we try to develop a kind of not only individual but collective decisions. And this is the principal component underlying Habermas's conception of democracy. So the concluding section endeavors to address a number of issues that arise when confronted with the task of accessing both the validity claims and the usefulness of Habermas's communicative theoretical account of democracy. So at the end, I'm symbolizing and summarizing what Habermas actually envisions as the modern day democratic setup based on discourse ethics, based on communicative rationality. He churns out 9 major traits. I will be quick. He says, there is no possibility of democracy without the process of deliberation. This deliberation may be indirect, may be representative, but it has to be there. There is no democracy without both dynamics and the structures of reciprocity. So as social statics are important, so social dynamics are also important. Number 3, there is no democracy without the possibility of self-determination. It remains open to scrutiny, however, to what extent it is achievable to grant every individual actor not only the formal rights, but also the substantive resources for autonomy and for self-realization. Number 4, there is no democracy without citizenship. And here, the term citizenship includes duties, rights, entitlements, obligations, and a balance between them. There is no democracy without a state. But a state is only a facilitator. It is not going to control you. There is no democracy without sovereignty. Why sovereignty? So that minimal legal structure can be maintained. There is no democracy without communicative rationality. To be exact, the socio ontological forces of reason, communication, understanding, intelligibility, and agreement play a foundational role in the construction of democracy. There is no democracy without normative regulation. So there should be not only a search for truth, but also this search should be truthful. I mean, I should be sincere and I should be honest, not only towards me, but towards my fellow journeymen. And finally, there is no democracy without will formation. The mere fact that in democratic societies, subjects capable of speech and action are engaged in the process of opinion and will formation, however, does not reveal anything about the extent to which their views are universally defensible, rather than applicable only to the limited horizon of context specific modes of individual or collective agency. And this is something which Habermas borrows from Prasanth Shukla, who wrote democracy I'm so sorry if there was some connectivity problem. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm just on the last slide. So, as a concluder, what is more, grassroots democracy can dispense with the formalized rule, criteria, and standards that are imposed from above, not from below, but there should be a lateral participation, and all the people should stand on the same and equal pedestal while developing consensus. A genuine ethics of democracy is not simply a matter of imposing the lawfulness of procedure politics upon the relative arbitrariness of everyday occurrence. Rather, it involves the challenge of ensuring that those whose lives are shaped if not governed by customs, conventions, and principles, are not only entitled but also empowered to negotiate and, if necessary, to define the normative parameters underlying their existence themselves. So, finally, at the end, I would love to share the famous quote as asserted by Habermas himself: the only knowledge that can truly orient action is that knowledge that frees itself from mere human interest and is based in ideas. In other words, knowledge that has taken a theoretical attitude. So that was all from my side. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. Uh, Professor Shukla begins his discussion on Habermas's discursive ethics by making the distinction between analytical and continental distinction and how the layman sees at this distinction. Then he discussed the importance of discourse ethics in the context of contemporary world issues. And then he moved to the distinction between ethics and morality in the work of Habermas, between facts and words. And he said how Habermas give primacy to ethics over morality. Later, he discussed the foundations of discursive ethics from deontological ethics, of, especially in categorical imperative of Immanuel Kant. Then he said the fundamental feature of democracy is that it allows human beings to engage in the process of thoughtful discussion. Discursive ethics tries that we, as we a communicative species, are capable of reaching agreements. And he discussed the 5 basic components of communicative rationality and the condition for emancipating the society and the conditions for discourse-based ethics. He concluded with an insight that genuine ethics of discourse is not simply a matter of imposing the lawfulness procedure. Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful presentation. And I know everyone is curious to discuss with you, and the paper is open for discussion.
Govind Bhattacharya ji, a very apt remark. In fact, the discussion of discourse ethics starts with Otto himself. So I totally agree with this. And yes, this was unintentional because I was trying to compress my discussion. But yes, Govind ji, I totally agree with you. If we have to start a discussion purely on discourse ethics, we have to start with the Carl Otto Appel version, and then we should go come to Habermas. Totally agree with you.
Sir, yeah. Sir, myself Govinda Bhattacharya. I'm working on Habermas. Actually, you don't know how much your work has been influenced me to read Habermas thoroughly, especially dialogue, then dialectic, then communicative action. By the way, sir, I want to ask, although you had already answered it, that okay, so Habermasian discourse ethics, I mean, how much it's applicable to Indian context, where there are, I mean, many conflicts on religion, then language, and Habermas told us that in ideal speech situation only that discourse ethics may possible, but so how much it's possible in Indian context, in Indian democracy?
Okay. A very apt question. See, these days I'm trying to understand Habermas theory and I'm reading the text again, but in the backdrop of Patrick Novel Smith. I'm sure you must have gone through some of the works of Patrick Novel Smith when he says, we sometimes become too kiddish to realize that the rules are made for the convenience Sometimes we find and we believe that the rules are unquestionable in nature. We fail to realize, just like a child. So, if some rule is given to us, we believe that the rules are actually inviolable. It is only an age of maturity which makes us realize, well, that rules are simply instrumental in nature and they might change over a period of time. In fact, the rules have to change over a period of time because they have to be context driven in nature. Just like remember in our childhood days when we were playing gully cricket, we had different kind of rules, but when we started playing cricket on the rooftop, the rules changed. Why the rule changed? Because the context changed. If we start applying the same rules literally to each and every situation, we are bound to fail. And this kind of theory becomes more applicable in the Indian context, where I must say there is not a India, but a bundle of India born together, tied together. So yes, once I talk about Indian context, the Habermas's theory of discourse ethics seems rather more appropriate, more applicable to me. See, he is writing in the backdrop of the European society, the American society, which are more or less homogeneous in terms of language, background, historicity. So, of course, Habermas is applicable, but I find he becomes more relevant in the Indian context where we say, in my side, there is a famous proverb in Hindi which says, कोस कोस पे बदले पानी चार वाणी चार कोस पे बदले पानी, which means after every mile your language, your accent, your pronunciation will change, and after every 4 miles even the taste of water would change. So if there is so much variation, diversity in India, to realize that there is no one truth, but there is a pragmatic truth makes more sense. I mean, that is my understanding, Govindji.
Uh, I am Pawan Kumar Mishra from University of Lucknow. Can I speak in Hindi if organizer allows me?
Yeah, please do that.
Thank you. प्रशांत सर, मेरी कुछ ऑब्जर्वेशन है. अब सोशलॉजिकल पर्सपेक्टिव में हैबरमास हम लोग पढ़ते हैं. आज अगर इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी की बात करें तो इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी की सारी पॉलिसीज ऑलमोस्ट मार्केट कंट्रोल कर रहा है. नंबर वन, दिस इज नंबर वन. एंड नंबर टू, एक किस्म का सर्विलांस स्टेट बन गया है, न केवल इंडिया बल्कि बाहर का भी. तो एक तो मार्केट पॉलिसीज कंट्रोल कर रही हैं डेमोक्रेटिक पॉलिसीज को. इवन बजट बनाने के पहले इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट से परमिशन, एक तरीके से परमिशन ली जाती है, और सर्विलांस स्टेट में हम लोग कन्वर्ट हो चुके हैं. और तीसरा पॉइंट ये है कि जैसे आजकल एक मॉडर्न डिस्कोर्स है कि एक किस्म का पोस्ट ट्रुथ सोसाइटी में हम लोग जी रहे हैं. तो इन तीनों पॉइंट्स के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हैबरमास का जो एथिकल इश्यूज हैं वो कितने रेलेवेंट हैं इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में?
First of all, thanks a lot, sir. It is an honor that you have joined the discussion. You are one of the leading sociologists in India. We all know that. And that's a very apt question posed here. As far as I understand, the term post-truth becomes so applicable here. The problem is that we have to realize that there are multiple facets of truth. But that market governed conception of truth tries to impose on us that there is not a truth but the truth. तो वो जो सॉवरेन के माउथ पीस से चीजें आ रही हैं वही असली ट्रुथ है. मे बी कंज्यूमरिस्टिक, मे बी द कैपिटलिस्ट गवर्नड और व्हाट. Habermas would say, as far as I can presume, keeping myself in the position, you have to take care not only of the truth, which is of course our truth, but also truthfulness. So how much you are sincere and transparent also matters here. तो अगर हम लोग कैपिटलिस्ट बैकग्राउंड में चीजों को देखेंगे तो आपको आपको वहां पे ट्रूथफुलनेस नहीं मिलेगा, हो सकता है अट्रूथ मिल जाए. Like for the sake of example, yesterday I was driving to Hazratganj and there was an interesting billboard which says there was a clock picturized and the time was 8:30 and it was saying it's 8:30, let's have a glass of uh, Bisleri. And ironically, the shape of the bottle was that of a liquor bottle, but the picture was that of the distilled water. So these are, of course, manipulation of the entire fact. They might give a kind of truth, but I presume there is lackness of truthfulness and the normative rightness, which are the utmost demand of any communicative rationality as per Habermas's version. But of course, sir, you know better, no doubt.
थैंक यू सर.
Interesting discussions, Prashant ji. Uh, Lovely hearing you. It is terrible to be away from reading and writing, the post-cataract operation. I never thought that it can be this terrible, away from the student community. And I can't even note down the points that you've spoken, but lovely. Uh, you spoke about the utopian ideas and then placed about the prayojana vichara of the philosophy and spoke about the bridging, the possible bridging of the continental and the analytic. I also added the Indian. So both myself and Professor Paneer Selvam have done this hilarious, probably, act of bridging the continental, the analytic, and the Indian. And so that's a lovely exercise, though people might differ on this. The disciplinarian walls have been, the huge disciplinarian walls are still they still stand high between the analytic and the continental, but it's individual's choice. Now, coming to Habermas, I remember having seen him in 2013 for the Athens World Conference. He was the star of the conference. People were crowding around him as though he was, an actor or a film star. People, they have such kind of worship for him. Well, I'm no Habermasian. I've heard bits and pieces here and there of him. And of course, large on communicative rationality and a bit of reading on it because I was too critical about it. And then I remember I've also presented an Indian critique of Habermas. I'll just focus on that. Though the previous questions that you have happened to gather are all on the possibility of applying Habermasian communicative rationality and the discourse ethics in the Indian context. Very, very relevant questions. I have something different to ask you. In fact, it is, of course, it is Indian, but then not on the Indian social or political situation. I'm focusing more on the Indian ontological situation. Now, you have already spoken about the plurality of truths and so on and so forth. So now, my critique is this: that please try to defend Habermas, and I would like to hear how a Habermasian would defend this. See, my charge would be that Habermas is not that way a hardcore. He doesn't have a hardcore ontology because all that he speaks about is, the pragmatic aspect of people conversing, trying to arrive at consensus, not to win over the other, but to arrive at consensus, to respect other, and the communicative space that you ought to have. All that is fine, but then there are deeper truths. These are all results that you will get in an ideal individual state where the self is promoted to the best. I'm driving it the Vedantic ontology, where the self attains its best and where the ethics becomes the ontology. So my famous theory, as I have placed in several platforms, is ontology is the first philosophy, and ethics and aesthetics are nothing but reflections of ontology. So you are ethical because you are aware of the absolute truth. As a Jivan Mukta would be ethical, not by noun, not because Habermas or Immanuel Kant has given certain categorical imperatives, because he realizes the nature of the self, the absolute consciousness. So, Bodhisattva, he has karuna being practiced because he realizes the pratitya samutpannatva of the reality. So, it is not an imperative that you ought to be kind to another. That doesn't work, in fact. This is the basic understanding of Indian philosophy. So, ethics, there is nothing called normative ethics here, other than, you have general statements like Satyam Vada, Dharmam Chara, etc., which is the general normative cases. But the deep ethical uh, imperatives are or have their footings in ontology. And the prime understanding of, be it take it from Jainism, or Buddhism, or Sikhism, any religion that has been born in India, and varieties of Hindu thought, all of them agree on this, that the focus is on the ontological principle of the being, where, at times you have the other being exhausted, as in the case of Vedanta, or the other has been presented in a different fashion, as in the case of Buddhism, so on and so forth. So, don't you think, looking from this deep ontological position, Habermas looks a bit extrinsic, or what would I say? That he seems to be talking about issues utilitarian. Say, for instance, take the present situation where there is a war between Israel and Palestine. And you know the conversation that is going on. Everybody would say that, if you listen to the dialogues, well, you say that both the parties are right. So now, how do you communicate? And it's not that we lack in any way reason. And here comes my solution. It's not my solution, the Indian solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Very apt observation. And I have listened to you previously about the reference about the ontology as the first philosophy which you have discussed. So I can connect with that. And in fact, this was the question we were discussing in our department as well. That in the Western context, particularly in the European context, most of the time our ethical discussions are extrinsic in nature. So I totally agree with you. And that is why the third condition, an ethical discussion would not be called an ethical discussion unless and until it impacts others. But in Indian context, an apparent question would be, if a conduct is a conduct only if it influences other, then what would happen to the vanaprastha and the sannyas? Would these people be called as ethical people or not? Because if they are in the solitariness, then technically, according to the Western version, they shouldn't be called as moral or immoral, rather amoral. But in Indian context, particularly in the Samhitas and the Aranyakas, of course, we accept that ethics prevails even if a person is, let's say, Robinson Crusoe. Because if nobody else is looking at the person, at least I, as the self, am looking at the person. But the limitation in case of Habermas is that, as you have rightly pointed out, his ethics is socio-cultural and political, more or less extrinsic in nature. So I'm not sure how would he react if we talk about the intrinsic value of ethics. So I can say at the best that I am totally agreeing with your query, and I would like to read further to before making any remark on that. Thank you, ma'am, for your apt
And
observation.
also, thank you, Prashantji. And also, I'm sure, being a close associate of Professor Paneerselvam, you would have heard when Professor Paneerselvam met Habermas, he was asking, does India is a democracy at all? See, these people have very little understanding of the
Right.
third world countries, and they think, they speak I'm sorry to use this term, utopian, because they think Europe is the globe. So this kind of an approach is kind of, he speaks about democracy, he speaks about voices to be heard, but then does he practice all this? This is one primary question that I would like to present to those who have access to Habermas. I think it was Pius, my friend from Nehu, was planning to organize a Habermasian conference at some point, and so I was quickly having some discussion on this, and I've also told them to present these critiques, the Indian critiques to Habermas, uh, to make him aware that there are civilizations external to Europe where ethics, as you have rightly said about Vanaprastha and sannyas, ethics is not something that you do for other. Ethics is that something which you do for yourself. And it is not that you behave in an ethical fashion in front of the other. You will always have to be ethical in isolation, in the presence of other, because it is an exercise that you do for self cultivation. It is not meant for another. So I really wish that if you get a chance, you or Pies or anybody could make it across to Habermas. You can also write to him, because I presume that he reads comments and he also responds. Pies was saying about interestingly, I don't know whether Pies is among the audience. I can look at the screen due to this cataract operation. He's saying that he was from Dr. Radhakrishnan Institute of Advanced Study in Philosophy, the Madras University. Once upon a time, it was called so. So when he wrote to Habermas saying that he's working on him, then he said, it seems, convey my regards to Dr. Radhakrishnan. He wasn't even aware that Dr. Radhakrishnan was no more. I mean, that's not a crime though, but uh, uh, these people do not take the third world countries and their culture and civilization serious. And we have, again, another possible response to Habermas from the Indian civilization, which you have made a reference to, is about the Samvad, the Vada. The Vada, Jalpa, and the Vitanda, you have the three varieties of debates where Jalpa is to win over the other, and the Vitanda is, just negating the countering whatever that has been present. So, as Richard Rorty beautifully has said, the American English professor, so he was saying that so in an ideal debate, the truth comes down like a swan, not being created by either the parties. It's commonly owned by both the parties, and that's where you join. So in a debate, in a communication, you are in fact debating not with the other. The other is helping you to arrive at truth better. The conversation is to yourself and the other. Uh, in a communication, ontologically, what happens is both of you get yourself pulled into the absolute consciousness, and there is a commonality. Both the consciousness place themselves in the absolute consciousness, and from there you get more and more creative. That is why, in the presence of the other, you become more creative. And that is the prime value of a debate. Why is it that you don't create things? Vade vade jayade tattva bodhaha. You can't create truths in isolation. Why? Because the other makes you more creative. And this is exactly what happens. Because both the consciousness get pooled into the general consciousness, the cosmic consciousness, from where the creativity comes in. So what I'm trying to come across or put across is that there is a lot that probably Habermas could pick up from the Indian basket and enrich as a thought. Did I speak too much? Prashant, did I speak too much about
No,
Habermas?
no, 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 no. It's very interesting, and I was just engaged in the flow of thoughts. Uh, in fact, that happens because, as we all know, there have been a lot of Western commentators who claim that, surprisingly, India has no philosophy at all. I mean, the people thinking from their context, people like W.T. Stace, Albert Schweitzer, Dale Reed, they say what you are doing is actually some sort of soteriology, a kind of religious philosophy, being too poetic in nature. So I feel that it's a kind of difference of context which make them unable to understand the way we in India try to philosophize the thing. And that is why I totally agree with you that unless and until you go to ontology, you actually cannot do ethics. So yes, ma'am, what you are going, the line of thought is perfectly agreeable. Totally agree, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Lovely. Otherwise, I heard after a long time, it's almost a week that I'm starving for philosophy, and then you were the first person that I have heard after my cataract operation. So it was lovely. Thank
You are
you
so
very much
kind,
for
ma'am.
joining
Thank
this
you.
forum. We are all much benefited, and I really wish that you also bring your students to this forum. This is a forum meant for peer discussion, where the young upcoming philosophers, this is a training ground for them as well, where we mentor students, I mean, the young researchers as well as young assistant professors to mold them professionally to take up leadership. We also provide them textual study workshops, try to place themselves, whatever they are doing. For instance, Habermas, how to look Habermas from, I mean, placing your foot firm on Indian soil, how to look at Habermas for that matter. So these are the kind of training that we are giving in this platform. Please encourage your researchers also to join this forum. It costs nothing but your time, and I'm sure you'll get many, many valuable intakes from this. Prashantji, thank you
Definitely.
very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Sir, there is a question in chat box.
Is it?
Gauravji, would you like to ask your question? Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Gauravji.
Sir, I have basically two questions. Firstly, you said in the beginning itself that the conditions of Habermas discourse are ideal. But sir, in ethical context, can we make an ethical theory which is presupposed to be set up in ideal condition? Because ethical dilemmas or moral decision making are always set of binary questions of yes or no, especially in conflict situations. So the ethics is already an applied practical thing. So can there be a theory which is based upon an ideal condition? Because in my opinion, ethics should not be set upon the precondition that conditions are ideal. And so secondly, this discourse ethics seems to be more of a in the nature of procedural principle, which leaves the decision making or making a judgment on the participants of the discourse, right, sir?
Right.
So when such judgments becomes contextual or subjective, don't you think the essence of fairness gets lost? Because moral rules should be universal and pass the consistency test, right, sir? So if the participants are the final decision makers, I don't think it would be fair or either moral, sir.
All right. First of all, Gauraji, as you said, ethics is the practical aspect. And in order to avoid this confusion, I made a disclaimer in the very beginning that we have to differentiate ethics from morality. So ethics cannot be the practical aspect, but the applicability of ethics becomes possible in the form of moral behavior. So yes, at a time of theoretical stand, I mean, in the analytical terms, the second order inquiry, we are trying to make the general or the so-called universal formula, just like the cup of tea, although its applicability may not be so exact as is presumed. So, once talking about ethics, of course, we are going to make a general law, while in the process of applicability, there might be some subtle contingencies. In fact, that is why in the Indian context, we make a conscious distinction between the Samanya Dharma, the Sadharana Dharma, and the Apat Dharma. Now, the second one, I agree with you. Yes, it is too procedural in nature based on the participants. But then, in order to avoid this question, I presume Habermas knew that this question would be asked. And that is why, time and again, he makes so much emphasis on the shared possibility of the life word. So he says, unless and until I understand your situation and you understand my situation, not only understand with rationality, but also with a kind of empathy, this procedure would not be possible. So Lebenswelt becomes quite important while talking about developing a negotiable consensus or making a procedure of communicative rationality. So the first part, there was slight refinement, but yes, I do agree with your second point, but along with addition that you cannot understand this procedure unless and until you admit the possibility of the shared background or the shared context. I hope I
O-
have made the point.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I'm Remya. I had posted my question, but I just asked now.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
so you were talking about the right now. Also, you were just talking about the shared life world and the how negotiations happen between humanity or between equals. Like when we are talking about democracy. So aren't these concepts actually transcendental in their real sense? Because when you're talking about something called a shared life world, it presumes something like that. So also humanity or equality, for that matter, is presumed. So aren't these transcendental ideas in themselves? When you say that there is nothing called a transcendental reality, aren't it kind of contradictory for that matter?
All right. Let me cite an example and not claiming that it is an exact response because, as I can see, many seniors are here. Professor Ghosh is here, and then, of course, Professor Nair ma'am is here. So I'm just giving what I have understood. So please forgive me if there is any mistake. What I want to say here is that, let's say, even if we do not talk about a transcendental aspect, particularly in the Western scenario, but still, suppose we talk about the Western context where a proper ethical norm for showing respect towards other is that I would take out my hat and bow before you. If I do so, it will be accepted that I'm showing respect to the person standing in front of me. So a British officer, once a British soldier, once the person would go in front of the officer, the person will first take out the hat and then make the salute. So happens in the church. So happens in front of the queen. So the norm in the European context is that you have to take out your hat or cap, and that symbolizes showing respect to others. But surprisingly, once you come to the Indian context, actually covering up your head is the symbol of showing respect to others. So maybe we are going to the temple or the mosque or the gurudwara. Actually, the priest requests us to cover up our head. So as you can see, the practical aspect, that is the moral behavior, is quite contradictory in the European as well as Indian context. Agreed. But the baseline principle before both the contexts is that every person is supposed to show some respect to the seniors or the elders. Maybe they are elders in age, seniority, designation, or experience. So the base principle is still the same, though its manifestation may differ from place to place. So I believe this is the way we have to understand. So of course, contextual difference would be there. So the Europeans will develop their customs and rituals as per their shared life world, and so do we Indian. And that is why, instead of the traditional or the conventional model of morality on one side and the individual or the reflective model on another side, Habermas would rather prefer a contextual model of morality, which will be hanging somewhere in between both the extreme points. So I think that is how he would tackle with the question. Have I given the response? Are you satisfied?
Okay, so it's fine.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can make some addition to this.
Actually, I was not talking about the contextual differences in the practical realm. It was actually the concepts which are built behind. Like if you are making, even in the ethical sphere, if you are making a general statement like that, even there the concepts, there are concepts which are presumed. Like if you talk about respect,
Mhm.
respect in the sense there should be an ideal concept of what respect is. So that is something which is beyond the practicality of how you put it in. So that is what I was asking. So how do you overcome those transcendental ideas which are there? And like I thought, Habermas, when you made the statement that there is no transcendental reality, I was stuck there and I built the question based on that. So that's why this happened. That's
All
why.
right. I can absolutely understand your aporia that how without a transcendental status we can justify our moral claims,
Yes,
right?
yes, right.
So we should have an ideal situation or maybe a litmus paper test going through which we justify or validate our moral claims. The point is that the kind of language Habermas is using, and there was a disclaimer in the very beginning that Habermas is equally discussed in philosophy as well as sociology. So the kind of platform or the kind of background Habermas is referring to is of course not transcendental, but maybe he's taking his sociological training into play, and that is why his background is coming from not the transcendental but socio-cultural and political context. And that is why he talks about sharing, because if you talk about the transcendental platform, the concept of sharing with empathy, I guess that would become a little bit problematic. So maybe this is the reason why he is deliberately avoiding the question of transcendentalism while coming to his discourse ethics.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It's clear.
Thank you.
If there aren't any more questions, Shimi, just find out whether there are any more questions.
No, ma'am, there is no any question in the chat box. I think we can wind up the session now with the permission of ma'am and sir. Shall we, ma'am?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Let me invite Miss Gayatri, our GFIP member, for the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to be able to propose the vote of thanks at the close of this monthly study circle organized by the Global Forum for Young Philosophers. Our resource person for the day, Dr. Prasanth Shukla, spoke beautifully on discourse, ethics, and Jurgen Habermas. Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful lecture. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Srikala Nair, the director of ISS, our parent institution and the patron of GFYP. It's her continuous support that drives the forum forward. Thank you, ma'am. I also thank Ms. Binita Joseph, Assistant Professor, Maharajas College, for introducing the speaker and the theme in a very lucid manner. I am also grateful to Dr. Likita for her words of welcome. Last but not the least, I thank all our participants, senior professors, faculty members, researchers, and students for your active participation. Thank you all.
I must
Gayatri,
say
it
that
is
I'm
not
really feeling honored.
ISS. It is ISSS. It is triple S. ISS is the extremist forum.
Okay, ma'am.
International School for Sri Shankaracharya Studies. Sorry, Prashantji, you were saying something.
No, no, ma'am. I was just saying that actually I am feeling honored and privileged to be provided with such a platform and opportunity and such esteemed audience who have patiently listened to me for this long. So thank you to you, ma'am, and thank you to the coordinators.
Lovely. We will put it up at the YouTube shortly so that it will be reaching to further audience. Thank you very much, Prashantji, for joining us in this forum. We look forward, and we are shortly going to invite you also to Kaladi. Let us physically meet some point of time, probably for their annual conference. Let's see what happens.
Certainly,
Thank you
ma'am.
very much once again from my side.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir.